Hey everybody. So in this video, we're going to talk about the types of costs and benefits that we have with employees. So we have different types of employees, right? So we have full-time, part-time, salaried, hourly, and overpay, right? So we have full-time and part-time, and then that's separated into salaried and hourly. And then if you're hourly, you can end up with overhead pay, right? So what's a full-time? Well, in the slide, I know it says works 40 hours or more per week. So that's a general description. Where you're working, they can decide whether full-time is more or less, right? Usually up to a maximum of 44 hours. And some places, if you're working 35 hours or more or so per week, they'll consider you a full-time. That's something that can be negotiated with your union, if you have a union, or just set out by the standards of the employer. And then part-time is usually less than whatever that standard is set by the employer. And usually you have multiple jobs. Maybe you have a full-time job and a part-time job, right? Salaried people are generally full-time employees, although not all full-time employees can be salaried or are salaried, right? What the difference is salaried people get paid the same amount whether they worked 40 hours or they work 50 hours, right? Or that said, if they work 30 hours, they're still getting the same amount of money per week or per year, right? Hourly people are going to get paid their hourly rate based on the number of hours that they worked. And then if they move into an overtime type situation, then they could end up making 1.5 times the hourly rate based on 44 hours per week or 8 hours a day. I know it says 40 hours in the slide. That's the US standard. In Canada, currently, if you work anything over 8 hours in one day or 44 hours in a week, you're entitled to 1.5 times your regular pay. That can be different depending on your employer. If your employer says once you hit 10 hours overtime, you automatically go to double time, well, that's up to your employer and possibly a negotiation with your union, right? So the difference between full-time and part-time, well, full-time employees are generally highly committed because that's where they're getting the bulk of their income from, right? They work a full schedule. They're generally more skilled at the job because they do it more, right? If they are exempt or salaried, they can work extra time without compensation and receive the same compensation no matter how low business drops to a point, right? If business drops far enough, employers can look at removing some full-time staff, right? Generally, the first ones to be cut would be the part-time staff, right? And full-time staff often receive benefits. Not all the time, over and above legally mandated benefits, which we'll get to in a minute. But usually full-time people get more benefits than part-time people. But part-time people can fill a vacancy without requiring overtime or a full day. Excuse me, they're usually easier to schedule, a little bit more flexible, and willing to work less than 8-hour shifts, right? Part-time people might want to come in for 4 hours in an evening. I know when I first started out in this business, I would working at a hotel. I would come in during banquet season or Christmas season. I'd come in at 5 o'clock, take my carving fork and carving knife, go to my sous chef and say, what room am I carving and what am I carving, right? So I would go in at 5 o'clock and work till 9 o'clock, finish carving turkey on a buffet, and then clean up the buffet and help clean up the kitchen at the end of the night, and then I was done by 9 o'clock. So a 4-hour shift, but I was going to school at the time, so it worked out really well, right? Generally, part-time people are going to be less skilled than the full-time people at the job at that business. Now, it's not 100% of the time that this is the case, but generally, if you do the job less, you're going to be less skilled than people who do it more, right? May not always be available when needed. That's the one caveat, right? Like if my chef wanted me while I was in school, I wasn't available, right? So, benefits. I talked about that a second ago. So what types of benefits are available? Well, there are tons, and there are more than this list that's up here, right? Full set of benefits can add 35 to 40% to a salary. Benefits can include vacation, holidays, sick leave, health benefits, etc., all the way through this list here. Some of these are legally mandated, and they can vary by country to country. In Canada, you're entitled to a certain amount of vacation pay. It's 4%, right? Holidays, you're entitled to stat holidays, right? Sick leave depends on the province that you're in, right? Health benefits, again, depends on the province you're in, right? Bonuses, generally more salaried full-time people. Retirement, well, we've got CPP, right, or Social Security they list here, which is legally mandated that you have to pay into and your employer has to pay into. But maybe they have an RRSP matching program or something like that. You get employee meals. Workers' comp, have to do that, right? Social Security, or in Canada, it's CPP. A pre-tax savings account can be along the lines of RRSP matching. Life insurance, disability. Most employers have life insurance and disability on their employees. And you as a benefit or a beneficiary, you could have a transportation subsidy, legally mandated maternity leave. There might be an education or training subsidy, health and wellness program, profit sharing. It can vary from employer to employer, but there's a few in there that legally they have to have, right? Whether you're full-time or part-time. The thing with labor is falls into sort of two categories. There's a fixed cost and a variable cost. So what's a fixed cost? A fixed cost is something that doesn't change no matter how busy you are, right? Whether one customer comes into the restaurant or 100 customers come into the restaurant, a fixed cost doesn't change. Your rent, right? Your rent is a fixed cost. It doesn't change no matter how many customers come into your building. Well, labor or labor cost is very similar in that your salaried cost doesn't change no matter how many customers come in. But your hourly employees generally are what we call variable. So you're going to schedule the number of hours of employees based on what you think your customer volume is going to be or how busy you're going to be, right? Once we put both of them together, we add our fixed labor costs and our variable labor costs. Well, then the whole cost becomes variable because that portion of it is variable. So we don't consider it a fixed cost when we come to our profit loss statements at the end of the month, but there is a fixed component to labor cost, right? That's just what that's saying there. So scheduling employees, right? So when you want to schedule employees, it's easier for businesses with consistent business levels, right? So if you're constantly getting, 100 customers every night, whether it's Monday, Friday, or Saturday, it's easy to schedule, right? You don't have to change that much. Even if it's consistent where you have, 10 customers on Monday and 100 on Friday, but that's the same pattern that you see every week, it's very easy to schedule. It gets more difficult when you have things like catering and you have a wedding for 400 people this Friday and next Friday you have no wedding, right? So then it can be more difficult for scheduling, right? Restaurant and hotels are generally the most challenging due to the hours that they're open, right? They're open basically 24 hours a day. I remember in the hotels, our restaurants would open at 5 in the morning for breakfast and room service closed at midnight. So we had people in the kitchen all day except for about 5 hours, right? What we do look at is performance standards or some mathematical calculation to determine how many employees need to be working at any time, right? So we use different, they call KPIs or performance standards, key performance indicators, that we apply to our forecast, which we're going to get to in a later chapter. Okay, we think 100 people are coming into the restaurant. Well, how many cooks do I need to serve 100 people? Is it 100 cooks, 1-to-1? I don't think so. But based on our business and our structure and how we operate our kitchen, if it's a buffet restaurant or a la carte restaurant, that performance standard is going to change, right? So we have a formula for figuring this out. We have the number of employees that we need. We take the number of guests that we think are going to come in and divide by that production standard. So if we think, as in this example, that the restaurant forecasts 60 guests per hour for lunch, and we know that a server can handle 25 guests per hour, how many servers should we schedule for the lunch shift, right? So we've determined that an acceptable standard for our restaurant is one server can serve 25 guests, right? So we have our number of employees that we need equals our guests forecast divided by our production standard. Now in this example, we've got 60 guests per hour for lunch, right? So we have an hour of lunch, they're not telling us how many hours it is. We have 60 guests and we think our server can serve 25 people per hour, then we can divide that out and we can determine how many servers we need. And we need 2.4 servers. Well, obviously 2.4 servers cannot work, right? So do we round down to 2, or do we go up to 3? Now, what happens if we round down to 2? That means now that every server has to do 30 guests. We've already said they can only do 25. So this could be pushing our servers to the point where they're going to make mistakes, our quality could go down. So what I would recommend is we go to 3 servers, and then hopefully we're going to get a few more guests come in because we're giving better service, right? We always want to round up when it comes to this sort of situation to make sure that we have enough, almost more than enough service available, right? Okay, that's we're going to talk about by performance standards. Next video, I'll be talking a little bit more about scheduling.